Welcome to another episode of The Catholic View for Women, where we give you news and views from a truly Catholic perspective. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along with my beautiful co-hosts Elena Rodriguez and Janet Morana. And ladies, one of the things that we don't do here on Catholic View is we don't shy away from the tough topics. We've tackled this one before, but because it continues to grow to epidemic proportions in terms of statistics, we are going to go back to the continuing plague of pornography. This is a topic that we hear a great deal from our listeners. Women are now struggling with porn addiction, not as much as men, but it's becoming more and more of an issue. And just let me give some statistics here real quickly before we get to our interview that Janet will introduce and some of the other information we want to share with you today. Believe it or not, pornography earns, this number just boggles the mind, $20 billion, B as in boy, $1 billion annually. And if you're looking at pornography, it may not even be, let's say, just on a pornographic website. Much of the sexual content we see, even on broadcast TV, is considered pornographic in many ways. 75% of content on TV, and that's broadcast TV, so your ABC, CBS's, NBC's, and then reference to sex occurs 8 times an hour on broadcast television. So you're not only getting pornography in all these different venues, you know, these different websites and these different video links and whatnot that you can get literally on your phone, but just watching regular TV, you're getting all these over-sexualized messages.
Well, and also too, you know, pornography, when you think back, you know, to like the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, it was more like the magazines.
Or the corner bookstore, right?
Corner bookstore. And back in the early days, like at the 60s and 70s, Playboy and some of those other magazines, and porno magazines, the guys would have to ask for them, but they weren't out front and center. But now everything's front and center. And in fact, some of the more popular magazines, like we've done this on our show before, Cosmopolitan, is actually pornographic in its content. So our society has been really immersed into a porno culture. And when I think back, you know, when I got married in 75, the internet didn't exist. But yet, there were guys who were watching VHS tapes. They would swap them around. They were actually, if you think back, they were the video rental stores that had
the XXX section in the corner. Yeah,
it was there. It existed. And unfortunately, you know, in my life, I married someone who was addicted to porn, and I didn't know about it. I had no clue, no idea, and it drastically affected our marriage. And matter of fact, he had a relative that was like almost like a distributor, and the cousins used to all laugh about it, like, "Oh, let's get the newest films." And I found it so horrible and disgusting. And we struggled for many, many years, and we tried to, you know, I tried to get help. And back then, there really wasn't anyone to go find. You know, nowadays I think we're lucky because there is more out there. But when I had this whole issue in my marriage, there was no one to even listen to or talk to. And eventually we did end up, years later, separating, you know, because it got to that point. And I've had so many women contact me and say, "We understand, me too, me too." It can be very damaging. And in fact, there was a survey done of divorce attorneys, and they said that 50% of their divorces, the cause was porn.
My goodness.
Entering into the marriage. Porn was listed as 50%. So it's staggering, you know, and the guest that, of course, I interviewed, Dr. Peter Klopanis, who's our expert here, I just, every time he knows I have this conversation, where were you? Where were you when I needed you? Where was your information? So I had that chance to catch up with him and do an interview. So let's hear what Dr. Peter Klopanis had to say about this important topic.
Pornography for men is a very addictive substance, and we now have the neuroscience to prove it. It's physically addictive and emotionally addictive, and it really can take over their entire lives and have a serious effect on their marriage. For the women who are involved with this, when they find out their husbands are looking at pornography, they're devastated. They see it as serious as an extramarital affair. Trust has been broken, which can take a long time to rebuild. It also affects their self-esteem and their self-image. Most of the women who perform in pornography are between the ages of 18 and 25, and they've had multiple plastic surgeries, and thanks to digital imaging and makeup, they don't exist in real life. So a married woman, she's maybe in her 30s or her 40s, she's had a few children, she's very beautiful, but she's not 18 anymore. And she sees these women that her husband is looking at, and she thinks to herself, how can I compete? My husband must think I'm the ugliest, most unattractive, undesirable woman on the planet. So they are just totally devastated by this. many wives actually experience symptoms of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of the betrayal that they experience from this. So it definitely has a huge impact on their lives. As I said before, trust has been broken. Many of these women feel that, their husband is this person that they don't even know because he's had this secret life all along. A lot of men go into marriage already addicted and their wives don't even know about it. So they think, who is this person? Who did I marry? What did I get myself into? And there's a lot of fear in that. If they have children, their respect for their husbands is diminished because they think to themselves, how can I view my husband as a good role model for my children if he's looking at this? How can I see him as a good role model for my sons if he's looking at this stuff? Are my daughters protected because he's looking at these young girls? What's going to happen? So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fears that wives experience when they discover their husbands are viewing pornography. Wives really need to understand that it's not about them. Often they feel that because their husbands are viewing pornography that they're rejecting their wives, and they're not. It's really not about their wives. The pornography is simply the drug of choice. There are many deep emotional wounds and conflicts that these men are struggling with, and they're looking for something to self-medicate with. If it wasn't pornography, it would have been alcohol, it would have been drugs, it would have been gambling, all right? That just happens to be the drug of choice. So women have to realize that they're not at fault, they're not to blame, they don't need to think that they're prudes. One of the dangers that a lot of women need to be aware of is that when they find their husbands are viewing pornography, they may think, well, it's because they weren't sexual enough with their husbands. And they think that the way to address this is to be overly sexual with their husbands. And that's not the way to deal with it either. In fact, that can actually feed the addiction. So they have to realize that it's not their fault. They don't have to take any of these drastic measures to deal with it. What they need to do is get help, find a therapist, find a support group, educate yourself on what this is all about, and then you'll be able to address this issue from an informed stance. Women are more and more becoming addicted to internet pornography, but it's not like men. Often when we think of pornography, we think of visual images, but it expands beyond that. Of course, women are not visually stimulated like men. So many of them are not going to be attracted to the visual pornography, the pictures and the videos. In fact, many of them look at that and they don't understand what the big deal is about it. They're just not attracted to it. Women are more relationally oriented than men. They're looking for a relationship. And so what's happening now is women are becoming addicted to internet chat rooms where they can go online, and of course in a chat room you can be anybody you want to be. You could be a tall, voluptuous, blonde supermodel. And you can engage in a relationship, a chat relationship with men, which often become very sexual. It's as if they're writing their own romance novels. And so what's happening is that they're engaging in these fantasy relationships. Often it's women who are very lonely that are turning to these types of chat rooms. And it's not just the single women who are turning to it. Married women who are very lonely in their marriages can turn to these and become addicted. Right now, when it comes to internet pornography addiction, the division is it's 83% men and 17% women. This is because visual pornography has been around for centuries. But for women, the chat rooms have only been around since the advent of the internet in the early 90s. But I believe as time goes on, we will see those percentages starting to change and more women are going to become addicted to this. For a woman who finds that either she is struggling with this internet pornography addiction or someone she knows is struggling, she needs to get help. Again, finding a therapist who is trained to deal with this, especially a good woman therapist who understands this, who understands addictions and can help her. Again, groups like Sexaholics Anonymous can be very helpful. If it's for someone she knows, S-Anon can be very helpful. There are many books out there now on sexual addiction and pornography addiction that can be read for information on where to get help. I think the key thing here is to realize is that there is help available. that people are now recognizing that, yeah, these are addictive substances, and there is therapy, there are support groups, there's a lot of help out there. So, there's no need to despair.
This whole thing is so heart-wrenching. I know so many women and men who've been impacted by pornography, and we want to stress that this is not an attack on all men, because we're seeing now, and in the research and even in my books and my talks that I give on media influence, we're seeing a lot more women who are, and you know what? I received a lot of criticism even from people in the church when I was so hard and so tough on people who were buying into the whole 50 Shades of Grey thing.
That's right.
But if you look back, and Dr. Klepanis has said this on my radio show, if you look back to when that whole thing started, now it's about 4 or 5 years ago, the whole thing with the books, then the movies came out. He said that really started to be connected to an increase in women getting hooked on hardcore porn, thanks to that film and that whole industry of 50 Shades of Grey.
That's right.
Pornography manipulates the man as much as it manipulates the woman.
Right.
And the problem with pornography is, well, somebody might say, well, I don't share your Catholic faith, so don't inflict your faith upon me. Let me live my own life as I want to, and don't stick your nose in my business. Basically, there's two problems with that argument. One of them is, it is not just your business. You're affecting another person. You're affecting your spouse.
You're using someone. You're objectifying another person.
Allowing somebody to affect you to begin with. Who would want to do that voluntarily if you really think about it? The other problem with that statement about it's not just a faith issue is that the problem with pornography is that it affects your brain very much in the way
like crack cocaine.
That any drug, any addictive drug would. So it's not a matter of just faith. Of course, faith is a very important reason, but who would voluntarily want to allow either a substance, a chemical substance, or pornography modify their brain, write new neural pathways in their brain voluntarily? Who would allow that if they were able to reason this? Now, that's exactly what pornography is doing to the brain of the person who consumes it.
Right, especially men, because men, as Dr. Klepanis said, are more visual. Right? It's very graphic. Yeah. And they keep going on for more and more and more. It's never satisfying, and that's why you're seeing more and more connection between violent porn and things that are happening in society, violent pornography. But that whole idea of, well, don't tell me how to live my life. You know what John Paul II said about that? Sin is never singular. When we sin, we not only hurt ourselves, but we're hurting other people, and there's a fallout from that. Nobody would say that about smoking. Well, let me live my life. I want to smoke. No, this is why we have all these anti-smoking laws.
And the secondhand smoke.
Secondhand smoke, right? Not to mention, we want people to prevent, getting lung cancer, right? Because we have all this information now. We know we have the science from secular sources, as you said, Elena, what it does to the brain, pornography. Not to mention the fact of what it does to relationships, even not from a Catholic perspective. Everything goes back to the church because God is the author of everything. But you could talk about this from a secular perspective and just talk to the divorce lawyers. You don't have to bring quote unquote religion into it, but they're telling you that it's showing up.
It's showing up. If for 50% of all divorces for pornography be a cause, it's a big problem. And like Dr. Klepanis said, pornography is a huge problem, but for these men, there's something deeper going on inside them. It's not the porn. That's just their drug of choice. They've chose to go to that. It could have been alcohol, it could have been gambling. They chose porn as their self-medicating themselves. They need help. And so for a woman that's engaged in it, it's the same thing. There's something else going on in her life that's not being fulfilled, that's disordered, that's not correct. They need counseling. That's what they need.
And the thing about the point that he makes about how women react differently to things, or men are more visual, women are more relational, that's why this whole idea of this 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon is so evil, because it did the whole thing about relationships. Christian Grey and this woman, and it was such a romance and yada, 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 and that's how they lured women in. So we're going to talk more about the continuing plague of pornography, and more specifically when we come back, we're always about the homework and the resources. We have a lot of resources for you, and we have a lot of really great quotes from Scripture and the experts on how to fight this plague of pornography. We'll be right back. Thanks for watching The Catholic View for Women. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along with my co-hosts Elena Rodriguez and Janet Morana. We're continuing our conversation on this episode on the continuing plague of pornography, giving you resources and lots of information to help you if you're struggling with this in your family or you know someone else who is. Elena, there's lots in Scripture about how we're to treat each other and our bodies. So let's read this quote from 1 Corinthians.
Yes, this is from 1 Corinthians 6:13-20, and it says, "You say, food for the stomach, and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies."
This is so powerful. There's so much insight here into what God tells us about the act of a man and a woman giving themselves to each other.
That's right.
In that coming together physically, that it's so powerful that it's not just about the bodies. It is about this relationship, this self-sacrifice, this self-giving love. Wow, that's so clear there. And what happens, what you're doing to yourself when you violate this.
That's right. You're actually abusing yourself and your partner. That's what it really is. It's abuse. It's really abusing yourself. First for yourself, but then them too, because you're objectifying each other.
Right.
In this whole process.
This last part of this quote, ladies, from 1 Corinthians, you were bought at a price. That's the name of a very powerful letter that was written by Bishop Laverde, who's now retired from Virginia. He has 2 parts to that letter, and he built a whole series around that. It was an excellent letter, and I think we're going to have it in our resources.
Well, if not, they could just Google
bought at a price.
Just
Bishop
Google
Laverde,
bought at a price, and you'll find the Laverde letter is a good reference. It really is.
And I think there's nothing new under the sun, as it says in Ecclesiastes. It's not like sexual immorality wasn't around. I mean, and we know what happened in the Garden of Eden, and just continued to get worse. So this is why we give you these quotes, because this is so deep in terms of when we are misusing our bodies physically this way with sexuality. It is a direct attack against God. It really is. So I want to also go to a quote, and this is what I love, and we do this a lot on this show, which I think is so important, drawing from research, as you were pointing out earlier, the secular research, the attorneys who are saying that this is a problem, this is coming up in marriages. But there are so many other people out there in the world with having nothing to do with religion. Okay, they're coming at this from a pragmatic research, secular perspective. What does the science say? What does the sociology tell us?
Facts.
And this quote from Gail Dines, who's a sociology professor out east.
And she's far left.
She's far left, and she's in Boston, on the East Coast. And she is not only an author, but she's an anti-porn activist. But you don't find a lot of feminists anti-porn activists. I mean, even with the problems with, let's look at the Me Too movement, right? A lot of good that they've done in terms of the Me Too movement, recognizing the sexual objectification, the harassment, there's a problem. But at the same time, many of these actresses are still involved in projects, and either in the porn industry
or in modeling,
or in films that are pretty pornographic in nature and objectify women.
That just goes to show you how strong of a grasp pornography is. That it is, even though when you start reasoning these things, it is so hard to leave.
Listen to this. This is a quote from her. This is from Gail Dines. Many on the liberal left adopt a view that says pornographers are not businessmen, but are simply there to unleash our sexuality from state-imposed constraints. Trust me, I have interviewed hundreds of pornographers, and the only thing that gets them excited is profit. It goes back to the money. And this is also connected to sex trafficking in big ways, which is another huge problem. Janet, can you read the quote from Humana Vitae?
Sure. And again, Paul VI, who's now a saint, he had
Prophetic.
so prophetic. But this comes from Humana Vitae, paragraph 17, and he wrote, "Upright men can even better convince themselves of the solid grounds on which the teaching of the church is in this field is based, if they care to reflect upon the consequences of methods of artificial birth control. Let them consider, first of all, how wide and easy a road would thus be opened up towards conjugal infidelity and the general lowering of morality. Not much experience is needed in order to know human weakness and to understand that men, especially the young, who are so vulnerable on this point, have need of encouragement to be faithful to the moral law, so that they must not be offered some easy means of eluding its observance. It is also to be feared that the man, growing used to the employment of anti-conceptive practices, may finally lose respect for the woman, and, no longer caring for her physical and psychological equilibrium, may come to the point of considering her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment, and no longer as his respected and beloved companion."
Hello.
I mean, when I said at the beginning of the show, what happened to me in my marriage, this is it.
Right.
This is it. I felt like he
An
lost
object.
I
Yeah.
felt like an object. I felt like he lost all respect for me. And more importantly, and this is what I said to Dr. Klebanis, where were you? Because when I tried to voice, we have a problem here, he didn't think it was a problem. It was all about...
It was you. You were the problem.
Me. I
Yeah.
was the problem. I was, and actually it became more magnified. When I was away from the church, it wasn't a problem. But then when I came back to the church and embraced the teachings of the church and realized how wrong things were, well, then it was all because you got into the faith so much and you're a prude. And so it really affected my whole spirituality, and everything was being attacked, and
But didn't you feel, even when you were away from the church, that there was something wrong, that you could sense it in your gut, this wasn't right?
Yes, I was sensing there was something wrong, but because I wasn't talking to God, because I wasn't going to church, I didn't have someone to go to, I was kind of lost all by myself. When I finally came back to God and realized the church's teaching and said, aha, so the inner spirit in me somehow was still there. Like they say, you're baptized, you get your sacraments, something is there still. So something erupted again to say, this is wrong and we have to stop, behaving this way. But he wouldn't acknowledge it. Because I guess, it's like Dr. Klebanis said, it's a drug. It's like an addiction. And I didn't understand that it was an addiction. And when I was asking for help, and I didn't know where to go, and he didn't want help because he didn't think it was a problem. So we were in this like dryer cycle, so to speak. Of course, it ended up destroying our marriage, and ended up in divorce, which is sad. But that's why I'm so adamant about this topic, that I feel now that we have the resources, now that we know we can inform people, I know I'm not the only person, and I know there's many other women who are probably identifying with my story right now. And that's why I think Dr. Klebanis' information is so important. And he says you not have to find a therapist, a good Christian counselor to help in your marriage. And of course, we're going to point out some resources, and that's why I feel...
we're only out of time, so let's get to that. But thanks, Janet, for sharing that. I know that's not early.
It's hard to share.
That's not easy.
It's hard to share, and I prayed about it, and I thought it's time to share because people have to understand. Well, anyway, we have some great resources, starting with your book, Teresa, called Extreme Makeover. She's got especially Chapter 2.
Right.
Chapter 2 is focusing in on this topic, and it's available at the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. And of course, your other book, Teresa.
My first book, Noise. Which came out 14 years ago, but it's still very, in terms of research and whatnot.
And that's also available at EWTN Religious Catalog. Number 3 is to visit the website of Morality in the Media for more information, which is moralityinthemedia.org.
That actually, we need to update that. It's now national endsexualexploitation.com, but we can make that correction on the website.
And then number 4 is to visit the website of the Parents TV Council for more information. That's parentstv.org, where you'll learn preventive measures not to get your teenagers involved in this stuff. Dr. Klebanis recommends the website Sexaholics Anonymous for more information, which is www.sa.org. Then finally, visit the website of the King's Men, and that's kingsmen.us. Another website is thatmanisyou.org, again recommended by Dr. Klopanis. And finally, go to thecatholicviewforwomen.com for more information. All these things will be on our website, and please follow through, do the homework, and seek help.
Yeah, and those resources are really helpful. They're all really, really good websites that have confronted this issue head on.
Right.
We know it's a tough topic, but we want you to see this truly through a Catholic perspective. That's why we're talking about it. Thanks for watching The Catholic View for Women. On behalf of my co-host, Janet Morana, and Elena Rodriguez, we'll see you next time.